Canada's Supreme Court has ruled that two federal laws from the previous Conservative government's tough-on-crime agenda are unconstitutional. The High Court says a mandatory one-year minimum sentence for a drug crime when the offender has a similar charge on the record constitutes, quote, cruel and unusual punishment, which is a violation of the Charter of Rights and Freedoms. The court also struck down a limit on who can get extra credit for time served in custody before trial. Let's go to CTV News political commentator Craig Oliver joining me from Ottawa. Craig, the Supreme Court has moved once again to strike down part of the previous government's tough-on-crime law. What's the message here, and what are we to take from this?
Well, just a little bit of background here. Stephen Harper did not like the judiciary. And one of his early election campaigns, he told some of us that as far as he was concerned, judges were really something like his political opponents. They were all liberals. They were too soft on crime. So in 2012, his government brought in a large-scale redo of the criminal justice system. And many of the elements of it, this was a bill called the Safe Streets and Communities Act. It was one of those famous omnibus bills. Many of the aspects of it were widely hated in the judicial community and in the criminal justice, among criminal justice lawyers nationally. So, of course, they went to the Supreme Court objecting to many of its provisions. Judges in particular hated having their discretion removed in the case of mandatory sentencing. That's why we hire judges, they were saying, to bring judgment to bear on penalties. So anyway, the Supreme Court, what they did today was agree with the members of the justice system, most of them anyway, not all of them, and they struck down these provisions which were regarded as too harsh, too cruel.
Let's move on then to the current government's assisted dying legislation, which the Supreme Court said it has to have in place by this summer. They unveiled it yesterday, and this appears, Craig, to be legislation that in some ways pleases no one, and in fact ignored a lot of recommendations from the parliamentary committee that was struck. Why do you think that is? Why do you think the Liberals took this tack kind of straight down the middle?
Well, we've been asking government officials that question today, and what they're saying is, look, we did not have the time to deal with all of these other really difficult issues in this bill. The challenges, the discussions they would have to have with all of the interested parties. They've got 2.5 months to get this bill into law, because after that it becomes law, and the country can't continue without some kind of a law involving assisted dying, the right to die. So that's what they're saying, that they simply didn't have time for the larger, the other issues, and they had to go with a narrow definition of the right to die, which is what they did. However, they are saying that in 5 years they will reconsider this bill. That's part of the legislation. But who knows what might happen? The Supreme Court might demand, or rather, sorry, the Senate might demand some changes and want to try to make amendments. Whether there's time for all of that, we simply don't know. But the amazing things to me is there isn't any debate in the country about the right to die, or hardly any debate. The debate is over why didn't it go farther? And so that's what the government's having to deal with. And there is going to be a free vote. All parties are calling this a free vote. That will be a very interesting vote when it comes.
It will. Keep an eye on that one, obviously. And let's quickly touch on the Métis decision yesterday, a symbolic victory announced by the Supreme Court. But, Craig, what happens next? Because we've heard nothing about the costing of this moving forward.
Well, no, and that will be a very big question. Where does the money come from? The government set aside $8.4 billion for Indigenous people. Does that include Métis and non-status Indians? We don't know that. If it doesn't, then they're going to have to find a whole new bucket for all of the 500,000 people and more who are now covered by them that they didn't expect to have to be concerned about anytime soon. And if they don't find new money for it, I think that First Nations people are going to be pretty upset that this money comes out of a bucket they considered to be their own. That will be one of the really tough issues involved here as we go ahead. In the meantime, the government says we're moving slowly on this. We're not going to make any decisions quickly, and Métis people will be pushing them hard.
Craig Oliver with the latest from Ottawa. Thank you, Craig.